All right, so I'm just gonna pick up where I left off because there's some more interesting stuff in this dialogue between Charles of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles and Francis of France. This is in News from Elysium or Dialogues of the Dead by James Anderson, Doctor of Divinity. Um, Arguably the founder of modern Freemasonry. He was a Scottish Presbyterian minister from Aberdeen who was ministering to Scottish Presbyterians in London and was a Grand Master of a Masonic lodge in London. So it's chances are most of the early Masons were Scots because, of course, the earliest speculative lodges were Scottish, like Kilwinning Lodge, etc. So, so this is his book about the underworld, Elysium, which is America actually, and so he doesn't specifically let on that he knows it's America, but he clearly knows that it was the Paradise Island or continent across the ocean and underneath the Afro-Eurasia. Um, but he kind of still tries to uh, dance around the fact that it's America. I think I doubt he was unaware of that reality. But so, anyways, so this is a dialogue between there's two dialogues between different Holy Roman emperors and kings of France, and which were the two great powers of that time, and in Europe. And so yeah, this is where they're talking about how eternity, the afterlife in Elysium, is so much superior to life in the upper world because all everything is transitory in the upper world. Nothing is really permanent, and even the greatest civilizations and the greatest arts and sciences often degrade over time. Although he's saying that there are some instances to the contrary, whereas sometimes the Francis is saying that sometimes some of the arts are actually improved. Um, Charles says, I grant it, sir, but pray let me tell you that many noble sciences and arts are now entirely lost, or lie obscure in a few hands. For besides that, all the men upon earth put together come far short in astrology of the meanest student in old Egypt and Chaldea. Um, so I'm not sure what astrology means here. My guess is astrology originally meant what we think of as astronomy, because astrology means the knowledge of the stars. Astro means stars, logi means knowledge. Um, but he also mentions astronomy. So astronomy, I'm guessing, refers to the names of stars. I'm not really sure the difference, honestly, but I'm not sure that whether he actually means astrology as we know it or something more scientific. I mean, even astrology in the original sense was what we think of as astronomy, or it included a very advanced astronomy, but just delivered in a symbolic language that only intelligent people uh, could understand. So I grant it, sir. So for besides that, all the men upon earth put together come far short in astrology of the meanest. So that means like the poorest, the least student in old Egypt and Chaldea. So Chaldea means like basically Iraq, might include Syria, but I think it's especially like Mesopotamia, basically. This means Egypt and Mesopotamia. Um, or it may even refer to the specific Chaldean, empire or whatever, but uh, chances are it just refers to Mesopotamia, which ancient noble uh, astronomy also was first, where astronomy was also first cultivated. So, oh wait, let's see. No, I'm skipping stuff. Which ancient noble science the modern mathematicians despise without knowing it. So I'm not sure what that means. Where astronomy also was first cultivated. So again, he's saying astronomy was first cultivated in Egypt and Mesopotamia. So yeah, I'm not sure the difference between those, but largely the same. Largely both include a lot of what we consider to be astronomy. So where astronomy also was first cultivated, have the mortals now any physician to be compared with Hippocrates, Galenus, Paracelsus or something, or other learned ancients whose writings instruct and wisely direct the most learned moderns? Which is the reason that so few of them have rose to honor and wealth purely by their great skill in physic, but chiefly by politics or poetry or the influence of women or apothecaries, or by some other lucky hits that the ancients had no leisure or inclination to mind. No wonder, therefore, that such great shoals of diseased arrive daily on our coasts. Such great shoals of disease. So, like, shoals, it's interesting. Like, a shoal is like a sandbar, I think, or maybe it could be like a mobile mass of, you know, marine plants. I don't know, but it's something like marine great shoals of disease. So he's saying like so many people are dying of disease at that time. And so they're arriving daily on our coasts. This means the coasts of Elysium. So he's acknowledging that the underworld is a continent, a landmass, just like the upper world is a landmass, and that people travel between them by sea. So, of course, that can only mean the Antipodes, that can only mean America. Nor have we yet heard of any modern poets and historians, except a very few miraculous men, that have justly imitated the ancients, far less able to rival and excel them. So it's true, like the ancient traditions of poetry, where, every language had like very complicated poetic epics that encapsulated all the accumulated knowledge of the sky and of the earth into rhyme, and with very set rules on like the numbers of letters or syllables or whatever, basically like the Rig Veda, like the Quran. So nowadays that's all gone. Nobody, not only has nobody been able to do what the ancients did, almost nobody has even tried to do what, or even understands what the ancients were doing. So he's very correct about all this. So, nor have we yet heard of any modern poets and historians that have justly imitated the ancients, far less able to rival and excel them, and where upon earth can now be found an Apelles or a Vitruvius, or such carvers, sculptors, architects, painters, as those formerly renowned in Egypt, Syria, Greece, Sicily, and Rome, far less any worthy to carry the tools of King Solomon, King Hiram Abif, and the most excellent artists of Nebuchadnezzar and other Asiatics. Nay, an ingenious architect lately arrived here assured Palladio that the mortals have not been able even to improve his designs, and that their highest ambition is to imitate the ancients. That's what it should be, because the ancients were better at almost everything than us. But nowadays, everybody just is eager to ignore and traduce the ancients and then produce a bunch of plastic garbage that will be our eternal shame. In short, we daily hear that men are not so grave and studious as even in our time. So they lived I think they lived like 50 years before this was written, but maybe they lived a couple centuries before. I'm not exactly sure. But rather comical and fantastic. Um, so and this, probably applies today too. Although a lot of this is stuff that Plato would say, and that's, I think, his point, is that it's always, I don't know. I mean, they basically, since the golden age, people have just been going downhill. In short, we daily hear that men are not so grave and studious as even in our time, but rather comical and fantastic. Fantastic meaning, um, like fantasy, basically bullshitters, I would think. Um, the statesmen, the lawyers, and clergy not accepted, and self-conceit so generally prevailing, it follows that true wisdom and prudence retire into corners, and are only to be found among a few, perhaps not the most regarded of mankind. So, there's very few people with wisdom and prudence anymore, and they're not at the top of, they're not the ones running things. And Francis replies, "As you say, all you say I heartily approve of, but however true it is that the world is much degenerated, I suppose you would have but indifferent success if you was returned to the earth, and should attempt to reform the present age, for their wickedness and self-conceit is so great and general that nobody scarce will humbly own himself to be mistaken, but will rather obstinately defend his perverse opinions and practices, without being concerned if they should endanger the safety of his fellow Christians or even of a whole republic." It's true. People are very irresponsible with their words. Like, at least a lot of people, they just feel entitled to lie at will, to say blatant, bullshit at will. And if they don't take any responsibility for like the harm that it causes on a daily basis, that with everybody doing that. Therefore, pray don't let us molest ourselves in vain by this melancholy inquiry, but rather divert each other with a short recital of our own lives upon earth, and of the most remarkable events in France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and other countries since our demise, according to our best information in Elysium, with the late occurrences brought in the monthly packet by our old friend Mercury, superis gratus and something, upon which we may raise very agreeable reflections and observations, hoping without a French compliment you will be pleased to begin your story, and I shall follow your good example. So, it shows that he knows that Elysium is, he refers to it as the underworld, as opposed to what he calls the upper world. And he says that it's basically a continent with shores that the dead cross the ocean and arrive at its shores, and that clearly it faces the sky just as much as the upper world does, because Mercury, goes down under the horizon, goes to the underworld, Elysium, then comes back to Afro-Eurasia and is able to deliver messages, Mercury being the fastest planet, so it's the best messenger. Hence why Quicksilver is named after Mercury. So yeah. And by the way, I was realizing that the fact that so much of ancient knowledge was encapsulated in song that rhymed, like all the ancient health spells, which helped memorize all the geography of America, etc., that this is a reason why we have the term well-versed, because that was the traditional way of becoming educated, was by memorizing song verses. And it still is for Muslims, for Hindus. You know, the Quran is a song. It's a one long song. So is so are the Vedas. You know, so I think so are the Homeric tales. So anyway, this goes on about some stuff which, you know, just talking about the Holy Roman Empire, and let's see. I'm just trying to see if there's any like other section of particular interest. Talks about Martin Luther here. Famous man called Martin Luther was born. So this is just giving a general history, and I think this is like the classical way to write a history is as a Elysian dialogue, or as like some other kind of dialogue, like what like Timaeus and Critias of Plato, etc. I don't know. There's got to be something else interesting in here. Here's something about Elysium. Inquisition to the Netherlands lost the hearts of that people at length, which produced most dismal effects, as we have been well informed in Elysium. So he's talking about the oppression of the Puritans, who, you know, the Protestants in the Netherlands, by the Catholic authorities. I mean, honestly, I like this guy. I'm starting to think like if Freemasonry went bad, it like went bad later, got co-opted. I think the Grand Lodge of England, by going public, it soon got co-opted by the monarchy. All right. I mean, a lot of this is pretty involved history. Talking about Erasmus, the humanist philosopher. I don't know. I was hoping there was some other stuff about the decay of society, but a lot of this is just history. Croppy people, does that say? Or crop. Diseased people. Croppy people are admitted to be touched as those in Tyrol. So that's interesting, because the Irish radicals were called croppy because they cropped their hair short. But that was like a century later, so I don't know if that's related. And I don't know. A true emblem of the upper world, where joy and grief have their turns. At Rome all nations resort, and each nation have their particular church. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think this is just a lot of like very involved European history from like the 1500s and thereabouts. But I mean, it's definitely has a liberal slant. Like it's against tyranny. You know, it's more populist approach. Like this book tends to chide like monarchs who try to expand their territory or expand their powers or anything like that. Um, let's see, here's something. So, towards the end of the 15th century, a special and unheard of good fortune attended Spain. For about the year, sorry, scratch my chest here. For about the year 1483, the Spaniards possessed themselves of the Canary Islands that still belong to the Crown of Spain. So the Canary Islands are along the off the western coast of West Africa, and you know the natives there were like a Berber people, like Amazigh people called the Guanche, um, and I think they knew a lot about the underworld. Like they even had a name for the people who lived in the underworld across the sea. Um, so anyway, Spain took it over and basically destroyed them and their culture, just like Christians destroyed almost every culture everywhere that had been there for thousands and thousands of fucking years before these fancy assholes came in. So Canary Islands still belonged to the Crown of Spain, and anno 1492, King Ferdinand rigged out that curious Genoese navigator Christopher Columbus with 17,000 ducats, who at that charge discovered the New World, from whence many ships loaded with gold and silver have been ever since brought into Europe. This uh, this other side of the globe was called America, from Americus Vespucius. So just the fact that he calls it the other side of the globe is another indication that he might secretly know that it's the underworld, because the underworld is always described as the other side, like the underside. So was called America, from Americus Vespucius, and that's not really necessarily true. We don't really know where the name America came from. There's good arguments that it didn't come from Vespucius, but who knows? A Florentine who, anno 1497, sailed along most of its continent. Its extent and exact business was never yet discovered, and to this day many Indian kings remain undisturbed in their dominions and heathen religion. But Spain got possession of a prodigious country in America that brings in more money than all Europe can yield, though both the continent and islands are but slightly inhabited, because at first the Spaniards barbarously murdered and drowned about 50 millions of Americans, which drove the natives to other parts of America, obliged Spain to send more people from Europe, and made the name of a Spaniard odious, even among the heathen. So that once, when an American king on the point of being executed was told something about heaven and hell, he asked whether the Spaniards went to heaven, and upon their affirming it, he replied that he would rather go to hell with the Indians than to heaven with the Spaniards. And of course, this would make sense since going to the underworld was the preferred afterlife of everybody in every culture, basically. This made the English and French and other Europeans to be better esteemed by the natives when they planted their colonies in America. So yeah, that's probably. Then they didn't realize that the English and French and stuff were just as bad till later. No prince in Europe ever had a better prospect of universal monarchy than Ferdinand the Catholic, nor better means of acquiring it, but knew not how to use them, and committed gross and irreparable blunders and false steps in state policy by those dreadful barbarities exercised upon the Indians, by introducing into all his dominions the terrible spiritual tribunal of the Inquisition, for the sake of pleasing the Pope, and for uniformity in religion, by the persecution that followed, and expulsion of the Jews, who amounted to about 170,000 families, by the entire extirpation of the Moors, and by sending such vast numbers of his own people into America, without allowing the assistance of other Europeans. No wonder then if we hear that Spain is both the richest and poorest country in Europe, being divested of the greatest wealth, a numerous and industrious people, and poorly inhabited by a thin and degenerated race not able to defend their soil. So it might cut me off soon, but you know, this guy's pretty based. Like, he's calling out the Catholics, he's calling out the Spaniards for what they. But it's interesting that here he's calling them out for the expulsion of the Jews, but he also seemed to I don't know. It seemed like he had talked positively, potentially, of the expulsion of the Jews earlier from Austria, but maybe I misread that. Or at least I think he had the later king of Austria bragging about expelling the Jews from there. So, Inquisition and any speed readers here, you can just read all this, but it's kind of hard to read. So I guess I don't know. I'll try to just read the end of this, I guess. Incredible was the wealth which brought from America to Spain from America to Spain in the days of Ferdinand the Catholic, and during my reign and my sons and grandsons. For then a common soldier would return with 10,000 ducats from those parts, but the floras are not so richly laden now, though still a very considerable treasure arrives at certain times in Spain, that might render the king very formidable if it was well managed, for Spain lies well for the traffic of for the traffic of all Europe. But the spiritual foundations and somethings have much